I'm Karin Ross. I'm one of the organisers of this event and in fact all the events for the Feminist Festival of Feminist Ideas and Actions. So this is something which a group of us, in fact I think practically everyone involved is here apart from I think 2 people, came out of a conversation that some of us had actually in Northumberland Cafe at Northumbria University, thinking, what are we going to do about International Women's Day? What are we going to do for International Women's Day? And we came up with the idea of doing something, obviously, and then we thought, well, okay, International Women's Day is a day, but what about if we make it into a series of events? So we came up with this idea of a festival, and so there are 5 events. This one is the first one, so we're very pleased that we've actually got brilliant attendance for the first one. And I think that probably you've all had the flyers for the whole festival, so hopefully we'll see some of you at some of the other events, which are basically every week for the next 5 weeks. So without further ado, it just keeps going off, coming back.
What is it?
It's my silly iPad.
These, is it? Okay.
Okay, so we've got 3 brilliant speakers who are going to kind of talk in conversation with me. I'm going to go backwards and forwards. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Obviously, you'll see that there is, as you will see from the poster, there should have been 4, and one person, Charlie Hardwick, aka Val Pollard,
yeah.
Val Pollard from Emmerdale, had to go and make a priority of her day job, so she's actually filming in Leeds. But actually, we have got 3 brilliant other people, other than Charlie Hardwick, because actually
just not soap characters, unfortunately.
Yeah, no soap characters, sadly, but we actually do have some brilliant creative feminists.
But it's damn women with jobs, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing, it's bloody women with jobs.
It's not right, is it?
No.
So, I'm just going to introduce my brilliant colleagues. I'm going to start at this end by saying, this is Karin Young. I want to say who you are, Karin, very briefly.
My name's Karin Young, I'm from Newcastle, and I left school, was a hairdresser, and then found myself over the next sort of 12 years becoming a writer. When I was about 30, I sort of hit my stride when I was about 30, and since then I've written some plays, a film script for Channel 4, which was a kind of very rough diamond, and Emmerdale. I've worked on Emmerdale for the last 13 years, so that's kind of me in a nutshell, because I'm a soapy person. Or a Dickens person, something like that. So.
Yeah, one or the other.
Yeah.
And also my next door neighbour.
Next door.
And this is my my colleague, Hepplewhite, who's going to say something about what she does.
So I'm employed by Northumbria University, but I make theatre and facilitate drama and theatre with people who are not theatre-y people as well. So I'm part of the Guild of Lillians, which you will hear a little bit more about later on, who are focused on theatre which is about and aimed at women. And I'm here just to sort of put in the mix a few ideas. We've got some strange writing and green hills across our faces.
It just says
awkward squad.
Yeah.
Yay!
Yeah, I forgot to mention.
And on this side, I've got my colleague, Fiona MacPherson, who's going to say something about what she does.
I'm also paid by the university, very generously, and I teach there, as Kay. We are both parts of the Performing Arts Department, and do work on a course that's called Applied Theatre, which kind of symbolises some of the work we do. We're both devisers, and a lot of the work that I've done outside the university is about the making of new work. One of the reasons I'm here is that we are also Guild of Lillians, which is a production company, and I worked with Karin to direct the Awkward Squad, which we'll be talking about later.
So all 3 have kind of worked together. They've known each other for a number of decades, have worked together in different ways, and in one particular way, where we're going to talk about it, they're going to talk about in a moment in terms of the Awkward Squad. But this is about creative feminism, and we have got, well, I'm sort of creative, but not in the same way as, I also am employed by Northumbria University, I should have said that. But what we're all kind of creative feminists in different ways. And I thought it might be useful just to start off thinking about a kind of light bulb moment that any of us, well, any of the three have had in terms of at what point did this idea of feminism enter your consciousness and actually start informing your practice? So maybe, who wants to? Karin, you want to start?
I can tell you when it started, when it formed in my head, and it's got nothing to do with what I do for a job now. It was because I had a big nose when I was young and I really wanted a nose job. And eventually I got one on National Health. I had a nose job. And then I hated my front teeth. And I thought, oh God, my teeth are really weird, they're really cross, I want 2 new teeth. So then I got 2 new teeth. And then I left my job as a hairdresser to become a nanny. And before I did the job as a nanny, I put loads of weight on because I was sitting at home doing bugger all, just eating chocolate biscuits. So I had the nose, the teeth, and then the weight. And that was a really, I had a complete moment of, that's what people talk about. That's what it is, where you just move from one thing to the next, obsessing about how you look and how big your conch is. Or that, I think that was my defining moment as a young woman that just made me sort of go, fuck that and chuck it out. And I kind of started to let myself calm down, and then things really fell into place after that. So it was all very physical rather than anything particularly intellectual, but it became, it then informed what I think, and it informed how I work and the characters that I write. And so I don't know if anyone's got a similar thing to that, or if that just sounds completely barking, but that's what it was.
What was your light bulb moment?
I can remember reading The Guardian. I was in a house that bought The Guardian, so there was...
Excellent.
Yeah, there was, and I must have been very, very young. And I kept finding this word, feminism, and I couldn't understand it, and I had to really sort of check it out. Feminism, doesn't that mean really feminine? And I was sort of going into these articles as much as I could. I'm thinking, well, no, because actually that's sort of saying the opposite of what I think sort of feminism is. So I can remember dipping into that. So it must have had something, you know, an influence. But more boringly, on topic, working in the 1980s in a theatre company, having done a drama course, wanting to feel useful, wanting to put my politics into action, and being in a really privileged position, which a lot of young people aren't now, where I could survive because there was a certain level of benefit support, and actually do work voluntarily in a community context in and around the city, putting together what I thought was right, being an activist and going on marches and generally kind of being, early, mid-80s, unhappy with everything. Also being in my, earlier sort of years where I wanted to do something out there, and finding ways of making theatre. So doing one project which was just great, which was working, because I'd done some bits with young women in youth work, where I know some people here from, and being able to do something with a project with Karin where we looked at sexual abuse and did what wasn't very much done then, which was put young women's experience of sexual abuse into a piece of performance. Then it became a training activity.
And it was talking about sexual abuse within the family, which was really unusual at that time. Any sort of stuff around that was to do with stranger danger, and we wanted specifically to try and talk about sexual abuse within the family. So it was quite sort of radical in its own way, wasn't it? Yeah.
And it felt like it was doing something that sort of there was a need to do, sadly, unfortunately, but it was very practical, and we worked in collaboration with the Rape Crisis Centre at that point, and that was a project that I'm really sort of proud of, and feel that it was doing something that I wanted to do. It was using my art and using my politics. It's not me, my ring doesn't do that.
Mine doesn't either. Mine's the good, the bad and the ugly, so I know it's not me.
So yeah, putting those putting those things together, the politics. And I know Karen's...
Naming and shaming.
Sorry, I think I've turned it off.
the youth workers in the room. Yeah, you're going to introduce this idea about personal and political together in a bit, so we'll come on to that. But there was definitely that sort of activism and culture combination.
I think having the time to explore those things, because you could sign on and because you could get a thing called the Enterprise Allowance Scheme, which we all went on and set ourselves up as self-employed whatevers, from car washers to designers to everything. And you're right, it isn't something that's available to young people in the same way now at all, because you can stagger around a bit, which I very happily, but always worked, staggered for about 12, 15 years after leaving school, until I eventually fell into the thing that then became, and just to be able to explore all of that, I think really sort of helped cement ideas, wasn't it?
I'm really aware that there's half the people in the room sort of, I'm talking to somebody who knows exactly what that was, because did it as well, and some younger people, which is also fantastic to see, who are sort of going, ooh, like that as well. So I, you know, forgive us if we say things that are stating the bleeding obvious. You know, we're hoping to lay it out there.
But every generation kind of, you know, reinvents its own politics in terms of the personal as politicals. Because I think it was, and still is, a battle cry for many people. It was then in the kind of 70s, and it still is, but in different ways. That though the personal is political, both the personal and the political change, and that's great, because each generation those issues are different. But Fiona, when was your...
Well, I mean,
What's that like,
actually
Northumbria?
ditto, because I was in the same
All
company
together.
as them, and it was called Anyone Theatre. And it was called Anyone Theatre because it was for anyone. But it was also based down at a building that doesn't exist anymore, the Children's Warehouse at the bottom of Pilgrim Street. So its postcode was Anyone as well, which we thought was rather clever. And rather than to go back over that word, yes, Anyone worked with organisations that were there to support young people and community groups. And we worked with a whole variety. They talked about the work that we did with Rape Crisis. We did similar work with the Legal Action Group, looking at sus laws for young people. So it was a theatre company that went on for 6 years, and I think it was an incredible training ground for us in so many different ways. So many, you know, opportunities to make work, to talk about work, to critique ourselves and what we were trying to do. We were constantly asking that question, weren't we? What are we doing? What are we doing?
And sometimes it was absolute shit as well.
It was
Sometimes we did some really good stuff, but some of it, we just all, you know, was all very much part of it, as well as trying and failing.
And really starting to get the chance with, you know, with no one actually giving us a wage, but actually we were able to do this on the dole, to play around with theatrical and dramatic forms, you know, to start thinking about the material that we were trying to create, start looking at techniques that we might use, or developing ideas that made sense to the people that we were working with. So we were sort of having the opportunity to develop our political ideas, but also looking at who we were as artists and how we might express the things that we were exploring with each other and with a variety of organisations. So, I mean, just to take that a little bit further, that's really been one of the things that's preoccupied me for the last 20 odd years. You know, I really, as a theatre maker and as a director, I'm constantly looking at how do you take what's written there on a page and create its life on the stage, and how do you make it speak not just with the words, but through the images and signs that you're producing.
But in some ways, that's part of the creative process, isn't it? You know, it's I suppose that it's interesting to think about how you form these two words, creative and feminism, how those things work together in terms of the work that you make, and how conscious any of you are in terms of consciously thinking about wanting to I don't know, represent women's lives in perhaps more authentic ways than the mainstream would normally allow.
Well,
And how conscious that process is.
we very, very consciously thought about it when we came up with the idea for the Orchards one, because you say, you know, every generation reinvents and brings about new stuff, but Fiona and I started work on a play about 5-6 years ago, and at that point, we were waiting for the next generation to come along and pick up the mantle of feminism, and it really felt like it was a complete bloody feministic desert out there. There was nothing happening, and that we'd gone through all this stuff in the 80s and 90s, and then we'd just done what everyone does. You have kids, you start farting around in the garden and doing all things like that, and then you suddenly think, where's it all gone? There was a momentum that we felt that we were very much part of and we absolutely loved, and it had gone, and around me I felt that everyone, powerful young women, were talking about weddings, all the time, and I just thought, bloody hell, what's happened? And I'd talk to them about feminism, and they would look at me as if I'd, you know, was going to make a pass at them or something. It was just something that was so alien. So I mean, that's why it's fantastic to have so many younger folks here today, because it feels that we came up with the idea of doing something around women's experience and women's experience of the miners' strike. And as we did it, Pussy Riot weren't quite there, but not far after, things really started to happen. The slut walk thing happened, and, you know, stuff that was going on in social media, people started to pick up on. So the play sort of became part of something, but at the time we began it, it really felt like this sort of thing would not have been happening then. It just, I don't know, do you think?
And that's not to say that there isn't a lot of feminist activity culturally existing, you know, if you take culture in its broader sense, but I think it's that explicitness that we experienced at the mid-80s of that putting things right at the front, right at the forefront and informing our activity. And I don't think it is just us getting older. I think that sort of embedding or maybe disappearing of those issues is, you know, something that I think is quite pertinent to this debate. Is it a time to put the slides on?
Do you want to talk, just before we go to the slides, do you want to say any more about the kind of the genesis of the play and the walk, and just give a little bit of context to?
Yeah. Well, you
crack on. Okay.
Oh, which one? Which one? Choose.
All right. Well, actually, it happened. We were just
This is
reminding us.
the Awkward Squad is what we're talking about.
It's a play.
It's a play.
And it was the summer, it must now be the summer of 2009 that we had this conversation in your garden, Karin, about let's do a play and what's it going to be about. And you said that you were really interested in, when you mentioned about the woman at Emmerdale in an office who could, if she decided to, rule the world, but what she was deciding to do was spend 2 years organising a wedding.
Which, you know, fair enough, but that's what she was
That's
doing.
what she was doing. That's what she was doing.
Really interesting
to do. And we started to talk about choices that people were making, about choices that we were making and that younger women were making, and what's all that about. And the play began with the title, Where Are You Going?
Oh,
No, where are you going? Where are you going?
And
Which I think,
woman's right to choose.
and then it was, woman's right to choose. Yeah, that was a little later. But that notion of just where are we going? You know, what's going on? And it's just interesting that was at the tail end of the Labour government.
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
So we wanted to do something that was about women and about women's experience, about feminism, but then in terms of culturally keeping up with what's happening. Then the Tories got in just after, so it was all about women. It started all about women, and the Tories got in, and then immediately we're talking about cuts. So it had to start reflecting instantly. We met Carol Stevenson at Northumbria, and what is it that you do, Carol? You're a sociologist, aren't you? Yeah. And Carol gave us the centre of the play, which is a woman who in the miners' strike, and there are examples of this, women who kept up the faith after the strike, who kept being politically active, and who became like a community focus for their areas once lots of people had lost their jobs, and were the sort of looking after everyone, you know, taking that role in the community. So that became the centre of the play. The woman who was the central character was one of those characters, and she was as much, you know, she was fighting for her daughters to have their rights, but as much fighting against the cuts in the community, and that's something that we sort of, that then gathered it. Oh, we've got things.
We've got things.
There's
We've got
a
some.
I forgot about the things.
Because we realised that we could spend 40 minutes talking about something that no one had any idea
Yeah.
the story of. So we've just this is a real whistle-stop tour through the play. So it's Awkward Squad. Lorna, a miner's wife, an activist for over 30 years, is about to have a community centre named after her. And her daughters, Sandy and Pam, have come home to celebrate their mother's achievement. Sandy's daughter Sarah comes home too. She also has a surprise for them, a boob job bought by her fiancé. Apart from the obvious, all are happy to be together again. And life, like all families, they reminisce. Their history was the miners' strike. Just to stop here, it's not really very clear in this light with all these lights on, but the set that we had was a two-storey set. The idea was that we were creating a miner's cottage, but that actually it was a 21st century interior. So half of the set was gauze, so we could reflect images, allowing us to reflect back. This scene was the grandmother and granddaughter reminiscing over the miners' strike and talking about what it was like to be at that time, but then there were images that you can sort of see, they're not very clear because of all these lights. These were Keith Patterson's photography. He did a year-long photographic project based at Easington, followed the whole strike during 1984-85, and these are his images that were projecting onto the set. So it's a miner's cottage, but with a very with a 21st century interior. So anyway, the family, they start to talk about the choices that they've made since. And the choices Sarah's making, planning her wedding, and Sarah's clearly spending a long time planning her wedding. But not all as it seems. Both sisters have a secret. BAFTA Women filmmaker Pam can't get a job, and we find out, after her car is repossessed, that Sandy has been dumped by her husband and is broke and living in her car. Lorna tells her daughters to get active and organised. She discovers, big shock, that her community centre, the one that's going to be named after her, has become sacrificed by the cuts, and so it is to close. Lorna was hoping once she got the community centre up, she could retire and enjoy the rest of her life and think about herself, realises that she has to go back. She calls to her tribe, her class, to start being awkward. And what we end up with is a rallying call for a peace camp and to take over the community centre that's being shut. So that's the story of the Awkward Squad.
And what's interesting, I think, is the aesthetic which comes through really sort of nicely in the images, but it's very funny. Anybody who saw it will remember it for its humour, and also drew on Libby there and Charlie there and Barbara there, all of whom have been performers in television drama, television soap, and that sort of significance. It toured nationally, long run in London, but other sort of regional cities where people would know these people as friendly faces on their own television screens. And what's her name? Also has been Lisa has been in Heaven, but that was after that.
I mean, the idea was that we were trying to make a piece of political theatre, a piece of popular political theatre that we could share with women on as wide a platform as possible. National tour, big theatres, but actually we could take over these huge commercial theatres talking about things that were of interest specifically to women. That was the main idea of it. So the idea of choosing very famous actresses, soap actresses, working through working through a popular theatre form was really important.
So I was going to, Karin,
Sorry, I felt I interrupted you.
No,
That's why I looked
not
straight
at all.
back at you.
No.
So what
Where
was-
next?
So just thinking about the Awkward Squad and just thinking about the kind of work that you've made, just in terms of audience, who in the audience has been to see any, the plays that kind of Karin has talked about? Anyone in the audience actually saw the Awkward Squad? Because it was 2012, wasn't it? So it's actually relatively recent. Anyone? Hands up. Okay, can I just pick on a couple of people that I know? Tessa, I'm just going to look at you. Your reaction to something like the Awkward Squad?
I suppose I felt the same as they were just talking about, in that it was a kind of relief to have something that was very out there after years of feeling like you had to almost pretend that you weren't a feminist. There was this whole period where people were kind of like, you couldn't say feminist, and it was a weird feeling, and you sort of felt like it was always going to be like that, and then so it was a wonderful relief, and the coincidence of that happening, because I remember when you first started talking about it, it was pre that, and it was almost like, what are we going to do about this? But then this thing happened, which felt wonderful. So the whole thing actually then felt very cathartic, that, it was almost like going backwards and forwards at the same time, is the best way to describe it.
I think if anyone listens to Women's Hour, if any media students, if you listen to some Women's Hour from sort of early this century until even just 3-4 years ago, I'd be amazed if you hit the word feminist, even with bloody Jenny Murray. I mean, there really was nothing, and now every single day there is discussion. The F word is out there all the time. Yeah, it's a very different time to even just a few years ago.
I'll be a little chair for the moment. Lady on the back row who put her hand up, seeing Awkward Squad. I mean, do you think it was a feminist piece, as in a way that hadn't been around for a while?
Yes, definitely. And I don't mean this to sound like it's dated, because it absolutely wasn't, but there were, obviously having lived through the 80s and been involved in theatre through the 80s, and all the same kind of issues that were all back there again in terms of the cuts and, the kind of unemployment that people are having, the fact that women, especially here in the Northeast, are bearing the brunt of that in terms of public service losses and all those things. That was like, and actually all those things about understanding how women's work, all that money that they give goes back into their local community, and they are the ones now, when we are loss in terms of the arts in schools and music provision and things like that, are paying for their kids to have extra drama on a Saturday morning, or to learn to play the piano on a Sunday. So all that's lost, and so I think it's very important, the thing that you talked about in terms of Karin, about things like the enterprise allowance scheme, and actually being able to play the dole, because now that's not an option for young people. You're a week in the dole, and they send you off to work for free in pound bath, so you don't have that space anymore for those people. And I think what this play did, which was it was good to put all of those people in the same room at the same time, because I think there's nothing more powerful than having us all in the same room at the same time. It's what makes us strong and makes us want to take action. But also to understand how all those things are all meshed in together. And I think we tried to do that in some of the ways in the 80s. And I think what's happened is we've been through a long period of time where all the things have become separate issues. And I think what this play did was to go, no, they are all interconnected, and all of these things make it harder for women and for men and for living in the Northeast, and the cuts and all those things. And I think that's what was particularly powerful about this play. And God, do we need more of it, as well as just recording our lives and our struggles generally, because they're not there, whether they're women's or they're working class or whatever, or us working together. So I think that's what's the most powerful about this.
Any other contribution? Maybe not just in terms of the Awkward Squad, but more generally, things that you have seen. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, you're defining yourself as feminist, but I can't remember, it was Friday when the minister came down from on high to talk about what she
This
would
was
have
the
defined as...
Secretary of State for Education, Nicky Morgan, who came to the university on Friday as fronting the last roadshow in engaging women. This is part of the government's pre-election pizzazz of trying to look like they were engaging women in conversation about what do you, women, think that we should do, government, to actually progress the gender equality agenda. So that's just the context, yeah. Sorry.
But I'm sure she would have defined herself as a feminist. So I would define myself as a socialist feminist. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what people regard as a feminist. And I just wondered, for the four of you on the platform, what kind of feminists are you?
There's slightly different strokes for different folks, isn't it? I don't know.
I've got a little bit of, I did some reading in preparation for today, and there was a little bit, not even refresher for me, but of discovering some new stuff which had reflected on this idea of feminism and political. And it was Ellen Fidian, thank you, Ellen Reiter, who introduced me to the idea of socialist feminists, that has to include the concept of class and a social analysis. And, obviously that's not a fine definition of it, but that idea that feminism isn't just about the condition of being female. Obviously it's a very good thing to say the personal is political, therefore I have something in common with women all over the world and in my own community. But that's not to negate the other privileges or disadvantages or discriminations that people experience. And these have been argued ever since, the fight for black people in America to get the vote went to black men first, when women, white or black, didn't have the vote. So I was just reading about that as well. So that idea of personal is political came out of the 80s, put your experience of oppression in a domestic setting, in a political context. But I think you're right, of course, that there's a whole other set of layers. And I think that is really important for the understanding of feminism now, that might have sort of gone away from the political into a sort of me, can have anything. I can have my boob job if my boyfriend is rich enough to pay for it for me, and if I can't have that, I want it, and that's perhaps not to diminish all
Boob jobs.
yeah, fair enough. I was digging a bit of a hole.
We know that you were going to that argument.
So just some refreshing reading that I was doing about how the feminist writers are still keen that there is that connection to repoliticise. And for me it's a social thing that young women, and I've got a daughter, and I'm sort of thinking, do you sort of make that connection that your experience and your friend's experience is something social and something political? Obviously she does in some ways, but I still think that the fervour of the 80s was something refreshing, and to me it was just what was happening. I didn't know any other, but looking back on it, I think it was a particular experience. It's also completely different, that we live in another world. The oppressions are more hidden. Who's got the power now is really much harder to ferret out. You can't go, it's the capitalists. You can't necessarily even go, it's just patriarchy. And it's not all men, obviously, but it's still, I think, important to battle these things out and talk them out. So that's my kind of feminism, if that answers that one.
I think I'm a champagne socialist feminist, tending towards anarcho-syndicalism. I think that's probably
Who's had a nose job?
Yeah. And 2 new teeth at the front. There you go.
Yes.
I was just, what you were saying about making things visible and like the person being political, one of the things that I think has been fantastic is the Everyday Sexism project that started on Twitter, because and like the power of social media to make these things visible, particularly to kind of like a younger generation that hasn't had feminism be that kind of acceptable thing that had any momentum. And I think the brilliant thing about Everyday Sexism is there's all these women and young girls, and the age of some of them is what shocked me, like 12, 13, 14, saying they'd had street harassment, they'd had discrimination, and then that sparking people going, oh, that happened to me as well, and then kind of this realisation sparking that that's what feminism is, that's what, and then kind of going, oh, that's okay then, I want to be part of that, and like making feminism this thing that's not scary.
Yeah.
Or a dirty word. like
Exactly.
we're talking about.
Yeah. It's not camps. I mean, Open Clasp Theatre Company's latest play is about young women, and in that a young woman goes dancing and clubbing with her mates, and she gets groped, you know, and it's got lots of other things in it as well. But that sort of everyday experience.
But what's interesting though is in 15 years' time, it's not a dirty word, everyone's talking about it now, it's bloody brilliant. But it'll be really interesting to talk to you in 15, 20 years' time and see if it's still got that level of understanding that we've got now, or if again it kind of drifts and slides off somewhere, and then it has to be sort of, you know, kind of brought back to the fore again.
But in some ways, I mean, that's that re-articulation of what feminism is, or what it can become, or the fact that, you know, it means different things to different people. I mean, given that we're now, you know, we have now moved on, you know, whatever we were in the 80s, we are now different people, all of us, you know, we move on through the generations. But thinking about those issues that generated your early work, that generated something like the Awkward Squad, do you see now the confrontation of the same issues? I mean, for you, Karin, working in mainstream TV, and for Kay and Fiona working in, as it were, mainstream education, are you coming up against the same issues that you actually... Yeah.
I am, and currently I'd say it's worse than it has been in the past, which is quite difficult. Sort of attitudes expressed, I find a lot, on quite a lot of soaps, not just ours, attitudes expressed about working class people is really quite shocking sometimes. You know, that a shorthand will be used on a council estate, and this means in the worst place you'd ever want to go to. Yeah, there's a lot of lazy sexism, and there is a bit of, come on, and unfortunately those folks are trapped in offices for 18 hours a day, so they're not necessarily out there having conversations like this, and I hope to God they will be, and there's, you know, there's not just me, there are others who try and sort of tackle it, but I think that it is an ongoing thing there, and in some ways it's about who's running the shows, if you like, and the example that they set, that, you know, sets the tone.
But just to pursue that idea a little bit about who runs the show, because quite often within soap domains we're talking about women running the show.
Yeah, and we are on ours. But if you think alternatively, some of this fantastic. I was just thinking, there's a load of drama on at the moment that's written by women. Lots of drama, pole dog, historical stuff, modern stuff. Sally Wainwright's doing some of the best drama, which is about ordinary women who are coppers and social workers, and so generally, I'm not depressed, generally there's a lot more powerful women who I think are coming from the right place and saying the right things in television and at the top, and their desires and lives are being reflected in what they're commissioning from writers, because it used to be a bunch of old blokes doing it, so you watch things about old blokes largely because they wanted to watch themselves. I think it's really positive in that respect, and there are just moments on different shows where it all goes slightly awry, and it just takes a bit of time to sort of reassert something. Yeah, sometimes I watch stuff on our show and I do think, oh shit, I'm quite, you know, I'm sort of embarrassed by that, and that's difficult. But at work, same as everywhere else, you've just got to fight your battles where you can.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you know, within students, there are students here, and it's interesting that you're here. You made a choice to come here because you're interested in having these discussions. I think politics, with my general feeling is that with a lot of students, politics is still quite a difficult word to deal with, and maybe it's because it's been, you know, the kind of political world that we live in, the way, the image of the politician and how the politician operates and how the politician works is not a good one. And I think that, you know, I have sons, and they vote sometimes, they spoil their vote. There is this thing about engaging in the, you know, the political mechanism that I don't quite sure whether young men or young women actually find it easy to do that. I don't know whether they see themselves as political animals, voting animals, and then for on the other side political in terms of who they are as feminists or what they think of the word feminists. I mean, we did.
But
I did.
Scotland managed to get them out.
Brilliant,
You know,
absolutely.
So it's entirely
yeah.
doable. Scotland got them all out, and
Yeah.
everyone was suddenly involved in it. And so
I think it'll be
something
really
worked.
interesting to see what happens in the next couple of months. You know, whether. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts.
I'll just say I was working in Biker on Friday night with a group of 20 young people from Streetwise, and just before, while we were working with the young people in Biker on Friday night, is because our detached team were coming across lots of young women that were not safe and feeling safe, and that's escalated over the last couple of years. And one of the things we're really, really worried about is what you were saying before, about things going back over. Young women do not feel safe in the city.
Yeah.
We did a survey of 300 young women, everyday young women, a lot of them working class young women, and 95% of them said they've either been groped, touched up, or accosted, whereas their bodies aren't protected.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to feminism, for a lot of young women, it has become a dirty word. It hasn't been about their self-worth, their self-determination, the fact that they have a place in this world and they should be respected. It's very much determined by what's happening in society. And for every soap that challenges where women are at, you've got other programs like Take Me Out that absolutely undermine that.
Absolutely.
And social media's got a massive part to play in this, and I think we haven't caught up on that.
There's a positive thing out of what you're saying though, which is that those girls can talk to you, whereas what we've all learned now is when you think of those girls in bloody Rotherham and Oxford and all, you know, of 10, 15 years ago, not listened to at all, and you just desperately hope that at least people are finding more of a voice to be able to talk about stuff like that
The only
now.
way they'll be listened to now is because they're now going to make it
Go to prison for
they're
5
going to
years.
prosecute.
I
They're
mean,
going to
it's
prosecute local
just
authorities.
ridiculous.
And to some extent, they're the people that are still making mistakes today.
Yeah.
Having worked with 3 young women who were part of the sexual exploitation situation in Newcastle, they were asked to come forward, and they gave their stories up only not to be supported and carried forward, taken further. For those young women, it took a lot for them to come out and actually say what's been happening to them, for them only not to be believed and for those perpetrators not to be charged. So they're still not being listened to in Newcastle. So Newcastle could have been a Rotherham, and every city in this country could be a Rotherham, because our politicians, our police and our social services and what have you are still not listening to the voices of young women and young men who are being exploited. So,
and one of the things that we have perhaps in Newcastle is we have things like open class. You know, we have theatre groups which will take those real experiences of girls and women and you know, anyone else who's being exploited, and actually make it into something which is a creative artefact, which then forms a kind of a point of discussion. Because, I mean, just thinking about Jumping Puddles, the latest open class theatre that came to the university, you know, it was sold out, and it is actually a useful way. I mean, it's why what you do, I think what the 3 of you do, in terms of making creative work and actually situating the reality of women's lives in a believable context, is actually really is vital and important, because it does actually enable those voices to be heard by a larger audience. I think just to say, I think the point that you're making, Kat, is really important about the power of social media to actually feel, you know, yes, that is my experience. And it's a bit like what you said, Tessa, you know, watching something, watching the creative expression, a theatrical, dramatic representation of your life, thinking, that's my life. Because it's actually quite affirming, even if the content is actually horrible. It is actually affirming because it makes you realise that this is a shared experience, and actually being able to talk about it. And I think the point that you're saying, finding ways to actually enable voices to be heard, which otherwise are silenced, which I think is a thing that you can do as creatives, as creative feminists, which I think is incredibly important.
Because it's still about power, isn't it? And it's still about able to empower or disempower where, you know, it's been taken away from people inappropriately. And again, it's that thing of the complicated structures of that, you know, that idea of how you explore self-image with young women, how you sort of tackle the whole weight of what's out there in the media to kind of deconstruct that. It's even that sort of, it's just a real biggie. And you know, I think as an educator, a parent, you know, a theatre practitioner, trying to find ways through that is really...
But art is a reference point, isn't
Yeah.
it? Which is what you're saying, is that if we put these things, if we make these things, if we talk about these things and argue these things through, then we are creating something that is take it, agree with it or don't agree with it, but talk about it, you know, and it, you know, and art reflects the society, you know, art reflects the society in which it's made in many ways, which is a conversation I was having with Carol earlier, which is again goes a little way back to the awkward squad. But if we haven't got it to look at and to talk at, then we maybe don't do the talking because we don't have the reference point that's important, sort of pinning these things on.
But just thinking about the next generation, unfortunately, happily, we have, you know, examples of the next generation right here. But just thinking about, for us, I mean, as educators, we are educating the next generation of thinkers, writers, politicians. So from your experience, what does that new generation look like? Does the next gen, do our students, do they ask questions around gender equality? Do they make assumptions where you're thinking, oh, we just had a conversation about some ways in which narratives are created by our students which actually replicate precisely the kind of gender stereotypes that we would hope had disappeared, which clearly are all too familiar. And how do you tackle that?
I think examples, you know, and it'd be lovely to hear more examples about culture and activism and how those go hand in hand together. Because I think having examples, having a whole load of stuff that you can give and say, look, there's this to see, there's this to do, there's this to be part of. And that, I think, is really important because it's thin on the ground. You know, feminism in theatre, I hope, you know, people can go, yeah, but there's this and this and this. I think it's a bit thin on the ground, and you know that's sort of, I feel a partial responsibility for that. I want to get out and doing it, and I was part of another initiative which was about supporting independent and fringe activity, which is bubbling under in the city, which I think is very refreshing as well, and it's very forward-looking. And feminism wasn't particular, you know, diversity was discussed, but not. I don't think the F word was mentioned around that whole event, and it'd be really nice to sort of put those things overtly back in there and say, how is this political? How is this feminist?
And I think there's always that worry with politics that, you know, God, you're going to bash people over the head with it, or you're going to bore people, or you're going to, you know, talking about isms and things. I think reading this book, A Good Night Out for the Girls, by Jerry Harris and Elaine Aston, which talks about, you know, in an age which might be seen as postmodern, if you want to discuss that one. But, you know, talking about things isn't as interesting as talking about, you know, me. You know, and it's, I suppose, is it about sort of trying to make things popular again? Because as you say at the back, they're just, you know, they're there, they're always there, you know, and I suppose what we want to say about the world doesn't really change. How we say it is often up for debate, but those issues of justice and social, you know, social justice are the same. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, for the last few years I spent a lot of time working with young people, actually taking probably the most boring subjects in the world, tax, the financial crisis, you know, you think the most boring things you can, and that's what our projects have been tackling, using story, using actors, using film, using participation and all those kind of things. And actually I have to say, no one's ever said at the end of it that it was boring, because it wasn't, when you say this is what, you know, this is about politics, this is about economics, if you say, oh, we're going to do this, everyone will go, well, I'm not coming. But using all that story form and playing all those other things actually gets people fired up, and young people are really, really excited about it. And lots of that is about even understanding, it is empowerment. To understand, you know, I have young women who've said, oh, you know, I'm not going to have a voice because I don't pay tax, you know, things like that, you know. And and when you talk to them, what they think is that they just want people to think that they want to disappear, that they have no voice and they have no place. And even, just being part, like we were talking about Scotland, actually nobody's having those conversations with them or giving them space to have that, all that input. What they're being given is, what you need is skills to get a job. You need to go out and pick up litter. Nobody wants them to have a
What do you
or
think?
to participate. They just want them to be silent and wallpaper and away from actually wanting to make any change.
You're right.
No, absolutely not. No.
Yep, actually. Yep.
One of the things I think for me is the way, like if we go back to the 80s, which I remember well as well, the way everything has shifted onto focusing on individuals, and there's no focus on collective experiences. And one of the things theatre can do, and one of the things Open Clasp do, and I talk about Open Clasp because I know them better than anything else, is reflect back to women a common experience. And so there's that kind of, there's a resonance, and there's that understanding that actually this is not just my experience, this is a common experience. And I think that's really important. I saw the show they did in Low Newton, the name of which has gone.
Taking flight.
And I was at the discussion after that, and what really depressed me about it was the governor of Low Newton said his interpretation of the play was that everybody can change if they put their minds to it. And I thought, that's not what Open Clasp were saying. What they were saying was, here are common experiences for women. But I do think that's one of the powerful ways that theatre can promote feminism, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about it. We're seeing what is the same about us by creating that community.
So just
Yes, person in the middle there with her hand up.
Just a straightforward, one of my particular bugbears is the television programme Little Britain, which I particularly dislike. I just kind of want to, because I do think that depictions of working class people and depictions of women that came through that sort of thing does have a material impact on people's lives. Yeah. And I was really interested in what you said about exploitation and so on and so forth. And one of the things that have come out of the kind of reports about people not being listened to or taken seriously is that those young people, those young women were considered to be somehow soiled or less than relevant or less than honourable or reliable or worth bothering with. And I think that's, that kind of television programme has had a serious impact, I think, on how we often see working class people and women. But would it be commissioned today? That's my question to you. I mean, you're saying, Karin, I think you're right, there's a lot more going on, but if that programme went to the BBC today, have things changed in the last 10 years or so? For them to say, blah,
I don't think that particular show would, because I do think it's too obvious now, and I think people there's perhaps more sophisticated ways of saying similar things. I noticed today, I read somewhere that Caitlin Moran wrote that book, How to Be a Woman, on the back of trying to sell her sitcom about her own family experience to the BBC, and they said, oh no, we've got another woman who's doing something funny this year, so thank you. And that was it. And then she saw the funny thing. She said it was funny, but it was a 45-minute programme on Boxing Day. That was one day of the year. And so because she was so incredibly fired up and angry about being dismissed, she went and wrote that massive best-selling, book that everyone loves. And then, of course, their Channel 4 instantly commissioned the series of a life and all that kind of stuff. I think using the everyday sexism, using all of those things, you have to, there's nothing like get fired up to focus your mind and I think to focus and bring about a lot of creativity, and that's what we all need to be doing really, as much as we can.
They also commissioned Apple Laughs though, didn't they? Outstandingly, I think Feminist actually did get rid of that, which was quite cool.
Well, yes, and that's good, isn't it? There have been these campaigns because of social media that have been much more effective, because on the flip side, social media can be absolutely horrific to people, can't it?
And I've noticed now in our storylines we don't say chav anymore. That was something I used to just constantly say, why are we using this word? What do we mean by this word? And actually, there's other words now, there's other things that piss me off, but that word, I think that whole Vicky Pollard thing has kind of, you know, moved slightly. But I do think all the sexual abuse cases, they're all, what they say is that young, you know, mainly white working class girls are less, they're worth less than middle class girls. They're just worth less. And, you know, that's appalling and something that's you know, so prevalent.
I mean, I think yeah, as you were saying,
There's a lady trying to get out.
Yeah, that's the way. Just through that
You're
door.
locked in.
Through that door.
There's a button.
that sense of funding, supporting community, you know, I think is incredibly important, whether theatre comes out of it, but discussion comes out of it, and we, you know, we are not locked in our insular world with a piece of, you know, a phone or an iPad. Actually, we are talking together, and think that's what young women need, and it's horrifying to think that, you know, that infrastructure that existed is just being, you know, taken away. We're talking about what's happening. Gates said recently, you're talking about what's happening within the community, that infrastructure that was there, that we relied on, which has been taken away, and it isn't going to go back again very easily. That's the depressing part of it. But recognising that those forums got to be fought for and got to be protected so that women can continue being part of a group, being part of a community.
The youth service in Newcastle.
Yeah, I know.
They've just about eradicated the voluntary sector in Newcastle, and all that infrastructure was all about empowering our young people to have a political voice and a statement in their own communities. And I fear for the infrastructure and the lack of support that's around for young people. And we're starting to see the sort of like the follow, you know, the sort of like the demise of that and the impact on young people that don't feel worth anything in Newcastle. And I think there is a very big class divide. Getting bigger and bigger. In Newcastle, we've got the most young people sanctioned in the whole country, and that sort of thing is really undermining young people's potential in themselves. And it's worrying. I think put feminism in there, and it just doesn't seem to be anything that they can hold on to, that actually has an equality with like an equal with empowerment. You know, it just doesn't feature in young people's lives as much as it should.
Well, we're not going to end on that note. I see it's 7:30. We're going to end on a positive note. I think just one thought for the future from each of our three. Okay.
And just, you know, I'm really lucky I get access to these young people. I've got access to making theatre and just note to self, keep at it, you know. And this is so inspiring. This has been really great to just sit and to talk about it. I haven't done this since you were talking about putting the Awkward Squad together, and those conversations of revisiting. So that's my optimism.
Having conversations.
It's really, really lovely to, you know, just have this dialogue. It's great.
Karin, you are going to have the last word.
I just think use the bad stuff to make good stuff. Definitely follow Kate. I think Kate Moran should have the last word this evening. I think you do what she did, get really pissed off, and then do something that's great. You know, that's it.
Well, thank you. That's a very good note. Get pissed off and do something. That's the takeaway from this evening's conversation. Yeah, we're not going to piss off and do something. So thank you to you three. That's enough. Thank you to you for turning up and making this first conversation lively, inspiring, brilliant. Hope to see you at some of the other events. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you.